Welcome to the Geographic Profiler. In today's episode, we are going to look at my original geographic profile of the Long Island serial killer and whether or not Tanya Denise Jackson and her daughter Tatiana Marie Dykes should be included as additional victims. Tanya and Tatiana's remains were recently identified by law enforcement with the help of Othram. As of now, Rex Heuermann has been charged with the murders of 7 women and has pled not guilty. I first developed and released my geographic profile of the Long Island serial killer in December of 2019, several years prior to the arrest of Rex Heuermann on July 13th, 2023. You can also find me discussing my profile on True Crime with the Sarge with Joe Giacalone and on Investigation Discovery's podcast Unraveled with Alexis Linkletter. Check them out and give them a follow. I will start by reading my initial geographic profile, which is not a full profile, but rather a one-page brief. Keep in mind, I did not work this case with law enforcement and had no access to the case files. Here is the profile that I released on social media. I will read through it, and then we will break it down piece by piece. This profile brief focuses on the 4 victims found in December 2010 and the 4 victims located in March to April 2011. All the victims were found along the Ocean Parkway in close proximity to Gilgo Beach and presumably killed by the same offender. The offender likely resides on Long Island, south of the 495, from the East River to Manorville. This is based on dump site selection, convenience, and access points. Looking at dump site MO and buffer zones, we can estimate that the offender lives some distance away from Gilgo Beach, likely between 10 and 30 miles. Looking at his other extreme attempts at concealing his victims' identities, this need, and his crime patterns would suggest dump sites further from home. His decision to use Ocean Parkway as a dump site is important because he simply discards the bodies in heavy brush, which he could do in any number of locations. The burlap sacks should not be overanalyzed. They are strong, opaque, hard to see in brush, and biodegradable over time. The high summer traffic and minimal access points to Gilgo Beach also reflect a high level of confidence in the offender. His use of Manhattan as a hunting ground and Nassau and Suffolk counties as dumping grounds reveals a buffer zone around Queens and Brooklyn, as well as a jurisdictional buffer zone whereby the NYPD are not directly involved. This could suggest a place of residence. His use of Nassau and Suffolk counties in the summer does suggest a warm weather relationship with the area, either through real estate, target backcloth, or comfortability. The taunting telephone calls are especially significant because several were made from Manhattan. The killer would not travel to Manhattan for this purpose alone. The phone calls represent a personal connection to the area, likely through employment or residence. Lastly, the identity of Baby Doe will reveal crime scene and victim selection and the offender's journey to crime. It could be the key to cracking the case. That was my initial profile from back in 2019. We will now break down that profile. We will look at different maps that relate to that profile, and we will see what I got right and what I got wrong. All right, the first thing you want to do when creating a geographic profile is you want to input all your data, including things like dump sites, places last seen, last known positions of victims, and timestamps. This will obviously vary for every case that you're looking at, but today we're looking at a serial offender, specifically serial murder. Now, you only want to use data that is confirmed or highly reliable. Otherwise, you will create unnecessary clutter and misinformation that will throw off your results. Once you have put in all the relevant data, start connecting the dots. Identify things like patterns, clusters, routes traveled, and geographic preferences of the offender. Remember, every serial offender has a design. You just have to recognize it. As you will see, once I then put in all the data, my starting point is really cluttered. My suggestion is to do what I do. Start by using Google Earth Pro. It's free, it's simple, anybody can use it. The difference between Google Earth Pro and some of the fancier programs is Google Earth is not technically a GIS program. It has no analytical capabilities, but it's perfect for mapping out data. Now we start to refine our profile. We take out the stuff that we don't necessarily need to look at. If you have everything in there at once, it just gets cluttered and messy. I'm going to try and not be too technical today because I want everybody to get something out of this. Whether you're media, law enforcement, a true crime fanatic, I want you to be able to watch this episode and go back and apply this to your own cases and your own projects. If at this point you don't know what geographic profiling is, quite simply, it's a subset of criminal profiling that focuses on the geographic, environmental, spatial, and temporal elements of human behavior. And I apply that to offenders, victims, and missing persons. This is my original map that I posted on my social media back in December of 2019. Keep in mind, I was not working with law enforcement and therefore had no access to their case file. Honestly, though, sometimes that can even be beneficial because you don't get overloaded with information. In this original profile, I made several deductions based on the 8 victims and the information known at the time regarding their body deposition sites and places last seen. Before I move any further, I quickly want to say that all the information I'm sharing today is public and it's accurate to the best of my knowledge. First, I said the offender likely resides on Long Island, south of the 495 from the East River to Manorville. This is shown by the blue polygon. This was based on dump site selection, convenience, and access points, along with other geographic and spatial factors. I believed the offender had a warm weather relationship to Nassau and Suffolk counties through real estate, victimology, and or comfortability. Second, I suggested that the offender lived approximately 10 to 30 miles away from the Gilgo Beach dump sites. The red half circle represents the extreme distance of 30 miles, which wasn't practical in this case due to the obvious limitations of geography. The yellow half circle represents 20 miles, which was much more probable. So, why did I previously suggest the blue polygon area? Because these half circles represent a straight line, or as the crow flies. We don't see the world from a Google Earth perspective or a top down perspective. We will see in the next map that while Rex Heuermann's home was only 5 to 7 miles from the Gilgo Beach dump sites, in terms of travel, his home was more accurately 17 to 25 miles from the dump sites. The red area covering Queens and Brooklyn, I thought may be a buffer zone. What is a buffer zone? Well, in geographic profiling, a buffer zone is an area around an offender's residence that they are unlikely to offend. Why is that? It's close to home. Uh, they're more likely to be identified. They're out in public more often. People are more likely to see them. They don't want to be connected to those crimes. So they create a buffer zone around where they live. It was possible that the offender lived here, but I still thought the blue area was more likely. There were no dump sites or victims last seen within this red area. Ultimately, Queens and Brooklyn ended up being a transit zone, which presents itself similar to a buffer zone. This was an area where Heuermann traveled through to get from one anchor point to another, rarely interacting specifically with this geographical area. We will see soon that Heuermann had no significant anchor points in Queens and Brooklyn. Lastly on this map is the yellow circle where the taunting phone calls were made from. I believe that the offender would have a connection to this area through employment or residence, with employment ultimately being the correct answer. In the next map here, we see that I have added most, if not all, of the presumed victims of LISK. We can see from this map that the deduction I made in my original profile that based on LISK's forensic awareness, some dump sites would be further from home is accurate. The body deposition sites of Taylor, Mack, and Castilla are to the east, outside of that blue area, and there are also potential victims deposited to the west near Hempstead Lake, which we will discuss a little further on. Before we move on, we want to break this down and get a feel for the suspect's awareness space. What is our awareness space? It's the area that you're comfortable in, that you're familiar with, that you can navigate in. If you can close your eyes and navigate around the area you live with relative accuracy, that's your awareness space. Most of us have more than one awareness space. We may have moved several times and you have an awareness space in each town that you lived. Your parents may live on the other side of the country. You have an awareness space there because you go to visit them. There may be a city that you love to visit, or you may fly south in the winter for warmer weather, and that area is also an awareness space. Now, for each and every one of us, Our awareness space is not as big as we think it is. Think of a river and its tributaries. The river, that symbolizes your route from your home to your work. You know everything along that route. You see it every day, you pass by it every day. Now, think of all the tributaries from that river. It's all the little creeks, the streams, the smaller roads that branch off your main route. Some of those you go down. You may have a sports facility you like to go to. You may have a gym you like to go to. You may have a specific grocery store you like to shop at, or maybe you go to IKEA twice a week and you know how to get there. So some of those tributaries off the main river you're familiar with, but not all of them. So in your brain, your awareness space is actually like that main river with a few of those tributaries. It's kind of like a spider web branching out, but it's not the entire area. And that's what we see here as well with the suspect in the Long Island serial killer case. If we look at this map here, I have identified 4 clusters for the suspect, Rex Heuermann. And one of the first things you want to do in a case involving violent serial crime, in this case murder, is to identify those clusters. And you might say, can this be applied to all types of crime? No, because in cases such as nonviolent crime, theft, robberies, you don't know who's pulling the strings. If you don't know who's pulling the strings, you don't know whose portrait you're painting. What we want to identify is whether there is one cluster, multiple clusters, or seemingly no clusters. We'll tell you a world of information about the offender. With LISK, we see 3, potentially 4 clusters. This map shows the clusters that we know of, to include the potential Hempstead Lake location. Clusters, or lack thereof, identify anchor points, relationships to space, and personal connections. Okay, moving on. Here we see the accused's residence directly in the middle of the blue polygon area. So we hit that nail on the head. And it's central to the largest cluster of victims. Next, this map shows the 2 most likely routes that the suspect drove from his residence to and from the Gilgo Beach area. You can see the routes highlighted in green on the map. As mentioned previously, these routes are about 17 to 25 miles from his residence, which lies within our 10 to 30 mile distance threshold. Now, if you were to draw a straight line from the Gilgo Beach area to the suspect's home, it would be roughly 5 miles. As I mentioned before, we don't perceive our world how the crow flies. We perceive our world in how we navigate our world. In this next map, we start to look at the suspect's other anchor points, including previous addresses, his office, the storage unit, and the gun range. We begin to see the extent of the suspect's familiarity, comfortability, and longevity in the area. Once we have included all of a suspect's known anchor points into our profile, we now want to expand into their personal network. With serial murder, we are going to focus on those people in a suspect's personal network with whom they've developed a shared awareness space with. If we're going to focus on shared awareness space, the best place to start is current and former spouses. These are the people that we spend the most time with. They usually become our best friend. We visit the places they grew up. They probably have family where they're from. Before we were married, before we were living together, we visited them on a regular basis and started to create an awareness space from where they're from as well. The next map looks at routes traveled by the offender. Now, we already looked at the likely routes traveled by the suspect to get from his residence to the Gilgo Beach area. So if we look at this map here, the one that's currently up, we see the white lines depict the most likely route that the suspect traveled to get from his residence to work and back. Now, you'll notice that neither one of those routes travels directly by Hempstead Lake. Another thing that we also see here is that the path of travel almost avoids Queens and Brooklyn, the red area, entirely, reinforcing his lack of connection to this area. Our final map focuses on Tanya Denise Jackson and her daughter, Tatiana Marie Dykes, whose remains were recently identified. Tanya and Tatiana may not be victims of the suspect, but they cannot be ruled out as victims in the series. While the MO, deposition sites, and proximity in time and place to other victims is alarming, more information is needed regarding their lives, activities, and relationships at the time of their disappearance. If we look at this map, we can see that the suspect's ex wife lived in close proximity to Hempstead Lake at the time of their disappearance, and the route traveled would have made this a convenient and familiar body deposition site. A thorough investigation will tell whether Tanya Jackson and Tatiana Dykes are victims of LISK, victims of an unrelated double homicide, or inconclusive. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share to your platforms. The truth is in the coordinates. See you next time.